keep this on. No, Angie, I'm waiting for you. And waiting 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 and waiting. I've been here for a few minutes. How long have I been here? I can't tell. I've been here for a few minutes. Yep. Haha. Right. Are we snug? Are we ready? When we start book number 2, The Chamber of Secrets, next week, Angie will have her blanket made by yours truly. That does not mean I send blankets to my avid readers. That's just, It's not my fault you took forever to get here. I've been online for a few minutes. Hang on. Oh my goodness. I was not. I was too. I was late. I was totally late. Damon was off traipsing in the woods. I had to call him back to the house so he could eat tacos, and I wouldn't have to worry about him being out there somewhere, and I'm in here reading a book to you guys, so. I haven't even taken my hair down yet today. Alright. So, Norbert the dragon was just sent back with Charlie's friends. So now Hagrid is dragonless. And what was it? Filch caught them out of bed. Filch caught Ron and Hermione and Harry all in the corridor because they left the invisibility cloak at the top of the tower. That's where we were. Sorry, we're doing recaps while I get rid of a headache. There we go. And it's a little chilly here today, so we're going to leave the hoodie on too. I'm not going to dress up for any of you. Okay. Would help if the book was right side up. I have many skills, but I don't feel like reading this book to you upside down. All right. So they were caught out of bed by Filch. Now we gotta assume a detention or something's gonna happen. We're about to find out. Chapter 15, The Forbidden Forest. Does anybody know what that is? What's a creature that's half man and half horse? You are not going to shave my head. We're going to talk about centaurs. He's a centaur. Okay. The Forbidden Forest. And coffee. I got brighter. Things couldn't have been worse. Filch took them down to Professor McGonagall's study on the first floor, where they sat and waited without saying a word to each other. Hermione was trembling. Excuses, alibis, and wild cover-up stories chased each other around in Harry's brain, each more feeble than the last. He couldn't see how they were going to get out of trouble this time. They were cornered. How could they have been so stupid as to forget the cloak? No, there's no whiskey in my coffee. Not yet, anyway. I have my bottle of mystery water, though. It's water. It looks like vodka, but it's water. All right. There was no reason on earth that Professor McGonagall would accept for their being out of bed and creeping around the school in the dead of night, let alone being up the tallest astronomy tower, which was out of bounds except for classes. Add Norbert and the invisibility cloak, and they might as well be packing their bags already. Had Harry thought that things couldn't have been worse? He was wrong. When Professor McGonagall appeared, she was leading Neville. "Harry!" Neville burst out the moment he saw the other two. "I was trying to find you to warn you. I heard Malfoy saying he was going to catch you. He said you had a Harry shook his head violently to shut Neville up before Professor McGonagall had seen. She looked more likely to breathe fire than Norbert as she towered over the three of them. "I would never have believed it of any of you. Mr. Filch says you were up the astronomy tower. It's 1 o'clock in the morning. Explain yourselves." It was the first time Hermione had ever failed to answer a teacher's question. She was staring at her slippers, as still as a statue. "I think I've got a good idea of what's going on," said Professor McGonagall. "It doesn't take a genius to work it out. You fed Draco Malfoy some cock and bull story about a dragon trying to get him out of bed and into trouble. I've already caught him. I suppose you think it's funny that Longbottom here heard the story and believed it too?" Harry caught Neville's eye and tried to tell him without words that this wasn't true, because Neville was looking stunned and hurt. Poor blundering Neville. Harry knew what it must have cost him to try and find them in the dark, to warn them. "I'm disgusted," said Professor McGonagall. 4 students out of bed in one night. I've never heard of such a thing before. You, Mrs. Granger, I thought you had more sense, or Miss Granger. As for you, Mr. Potter, I thought Gryffindor meant more to you than this. All 3 of you will receive detention. Yes, you too, Mr. Longbottom. Nothing gives you the right to walk around the school at night, especially these days. It's very dangerous. And 50 points will be taken from Gryffindor." 50? Harry gasped. They would lose the lead he'd won in the last Quidditch match. 50 points each, said Professor McGonagall, breathing heavily through her long pointed nose. "Professor, please! You can't! Don't tell me what I can and can't do, Potter. Now get back to bed, all of you. I've never been more ashamed of Gryffindor students." 150 points lost. This put Gryffindor in last place. In one night, they'd ruined any chance of that Gryffindor had for the House Cup. Harry felt as though the bottom had dropped out of his stomach. How could they ever make up for this? Harry didn't sleep all night. He could hear Neville sobbing into his pillow for what seemed like hours. Harry couldn't think of anything to say to comfort him. He knew Neville, like himself, was dreading the dawn. What would happen when the rest of Gryffindor found out what they'd done? At first, Gryffindors passing the giant hourglass that recorded house points the next day thought there'd been a mistake. How could they suddenly have 150 points fewer than yesterday? And then the story started to spread. Harry Potter, the famous Harry Potter, their hero of 2 Quidditch matches, had lost them all those points, him and a couple of other stupid first years. From being one of the most popular and admired people at the school, Harry was suddenly the most hated. Even Ravenclaws and Hufflepuffs turned on him, because everyone had been longing to see Slytherin lose the House Cup. Everywhere Harry went, people pointed, and didn't trouble to lower their voices as they insulted him. Slytherins, on the other hand, clapped as he walked past them, whistling and cheering. "Thanks, Potter, we owe you one!" Only Ron stood for him. "They'll all forget this in a few weeks. Fred and George have lost loads of points in all the time they've been here, and people still like them." "They've never lost 150 points in one go, though, have they?" said Harry miserably. "Well, no," Ron admitted. It was a bit late to repair the damage, but Harry swore to himself not to meddle in things that weren't his business from now on. He'd had it with sneaking around and spying. He felt so ashamed of himself that he went to Wood and offered to resign from the Quidditch team. "Resign?" Wood thundered. "What good'll that do? How are you going to get any points back if we can't win at Quidditch?" But even Quidditch had lost its fun. The rest of the team wouldn't speak to Harry during practice, and if they had to speak to him, they called him the Seeker. Hermione and Neville were suffering too. They didn't have as bad a time as Harry, because they weren't as well known, but nobody would speak to them either. Hermione had stopped drawing attention to herself in class, keeping her head down and working in silence. Harry was almost glad that the exams weren't far away. All the studying he had to do kept his mind off his misery. He, Ron, and Hermione kept to themselves, working late into the night, trying to remember the ingredients in complicated potions, learn charms and spells by heart, memorize the dates of magical discoveries and goblin rebellions. Then, about a week before the exams were due to start, Harry's new resolution not to interfere in anything that didn't concern him was put to an unexpected test. Walking back from the library on his own one afternoon, he heard somebody whimpering from a classroom up ahead. As he drew closer, he heard Quirrell's voice. "No, not again! Please!" It sounded as though someone was threatening him. Harry moved closer. All right, he heard Quirrell sob. The next second, Quirrell came hurrying out of the classroom, straightening his turban. He was pale and looked as though he was about to cry. He strode out of sight. Harry didn't think Quirrell had even noticed him. He waited until Quirrell's footsteps had disappeared and then peered into the classroom. It was empty, but a door stood ajar at the other end. Harry was halfway towards it before he remembered that he'd promised himself no meddling. All the same, he'd have gambled 12 Sorcerer's Stones that Snape had just left the room, and from what Harry had just heard, Snape would be walking with a new spring in his step. Quirrell seemed to have given in at last. Harry went back to the library where Hermione was testing Ron on astronomy. Harry told them what he'd heard. "Snape's done it again, then," said Ron. "If Quirrell told him how to break his anti-dark force spell..." "And then there's Fluffy, though," said Hermione. "Maybe Snape's found out how to get past him without asking Hagrid," said Ron, looking up at the thousands of books surrounding them. "I bet there's a book somewhere in here telling you how to get past a giant 3-headed dog. What do we do, Harry?" The light of adventure was kindling again in Ron's eyes, but Hermione answered before Harry could. "Go to Dumbledore. That's what we should have done ages ago. If we try anything ourselves, we'll be thrown out for sure." "But we've got no proof," said Harry. "Quirrell's too scared to back us up. Snape's only got to say he doesn't know how a troll got in on Halloween, and that he was nowhere near the 3rd floor. Who do you think they'll believe? Him or us? It's not exactly a secret that we hate him. Dumbledore think we made it up to get him sacked. Filch wouldn't help us if his life depended on it. He's too friendly with Snape, and the more students get thrown out, the better, he'll think. And don't forget, we're not supposed to know about the stone or Fluffy. That'll take a lot of explaining." Hermione looked convinced, but Ron didn't. "If we just do a bit of poking around..." "No," said Harry flatly. "We've done enough poking around." He pulled a map of Jupiter towards him and started to learn the names of its moons. The following morning, notes were delivered to Harry, Hermione, and Neville at the breakfast table. They were all the same. "Your detention will take place at 11 o'clock tonight. Meet Filch in the entrance hall. Professor M. McGonagall." Harry had forgotten they still had detention to do for points. Harry had forgotten they still had the detention to do in the furor of the points that they'd lost. He'd half expected Hermione to complain that there was a whole night of studying lost, but she didn't say a word. Like Harry, she felt they deserved what they got. At 11 o'clock that night, they said goodbye to Ron in the common room and went down the entrance hall with Neville. Filch was already there, and so was Malfoy. Harry had also forgotten that Malfoy had gotten the detention too. "Follow me," said Filch, lifting a lamp and leading them outside. "I bet you'll think twice about breaking a school rule again, won't you, eh?" he said, leering at them. "Oh, yes, hard work and pain are the best teachers if you ask me. It's just a pity they let the old punishments die out. Hanging you by your wrists from the ceiling for days. I've got the chains still in my office. Keep 'em well oiled in case they're ever needed. Right, off you go, and don't think about running off now. It'll be worse for you if you do." They marched off across the dark grounds. Neville kept sniffing. Harry wondered what their punishment was going to be. It must be something really horrible, or Filch wouldn't be sounding so delighted. The moon was bright, but clouds scuttered across it and it kept throwing them into darkness. Ahead, Harry could see the lighted windows of Hagrid's hut. Then they heard a distant shout. "Is that you, Filch? Hurry up! I gotta get started." Harry's heart rose. If they were going to be working with Hagrid, it wouldn't be so bad. His relief must have shown in his face because Filch said, I suppose you think you'll be enjoying yourselves with that oaf? Well, think again, boy. It's into the forest you're going, and I'm much mistaken if you'll come out in one piece. At this, Neville let out a little moan, and Malfoy stopped dead in his tracks. The forest, he repeated. He didn't sound quite as cool as usual. We can't go in there at night. There's all sorts of things in there. Werewolves, I've heard. Neville clutched the sleeves of Harry's robe and made a choking noise. That's your problem, isn't it? Said Filch, his voice cackling with glee. Should have thought of them werewolves before you got in trouble, shouldn't you? Hagrid came striding toward them out of the dark, Fang at his heel. He was carrying a large crossbow, and a quiver of arrows hung over his shoulder. About time, he said. I've been waiting for half an hour already. All right, Harry, Hermione. I wouldn't be too friendly with them, Hagrid, said Filch coldly. They're here to be punished, after all. Oh, that's why you're late, is it? Said Hagrid, frowning at Filch. Been lecturing them, eh? It's not your place to do that. You've done your bit. I'll take them from here. I'll be back at dawn, said Filch, for what's left of them, he added nastily, and he turned and started back towards the castle, his lamp bobbing away in the darkness. Malfoy now turned to Hagrid. I'm not going in that forest, he said, and Harry was pleased to hear a note of panic in his voice. You are if you want to stay at Hogwarts, said Hagrid fiercely. You've done wrong, and now you got to pay for it. But this is servant stuff. It's not for students to do. I thought we'd be copying lines or something. If my father knew what I was doing, he'd... Tell you that's how it is at Hogwarts, Hagrid growled. Copying lines. What good's that to anyone? You'll do something useful or you'll get out. If you think your father'd rather you were expelled, then get back up to the castle and pack. Go on. Malfoy didn't move. He looked at Hagrid furiously, but then dropped his gaze. Right then, said Hagrid. Now, listen carefully, 'cause it's dangerous what we're doing tonight, and I don't want no one taking risks. Follow me over here a moment. He led them to the very edge of the forest. Holding his lamp up high, he pointed down a narrow, winding earth track that disappeared into the thick, black trees. A light breeze lifted their hair as they looked into the forest. See there, said Hagrid. See that stuff shining on the ground? The silvery stuff? That's unicorn blood. There's a unicorn in there, been hurt badly by something. This is the second time in a week. I found one dead last Wednesday. We're going to try and find the poor thing. We might have to put it out of its misery. But what if whatever hurt the unicorn finds us first, said Malfoy, unable to keep the fear out of his voice. There's nothing that lives in this forest that'll hurt you if you're with me or Fang. And keep to the path. Right, now we're going to split into two parties and follow the trail in different directions. There's blood all over the place. It must have been staggering around since last night, at least. I want Fang, said Malfoy quickly, looking at Fang's long teeth. All right, but I warn you, he's a coward, said Hagrid. So me and Harry and Hermione will go one way, and Draco, Neville, and Fang will go the other. Now, if any of us finds the unicorn, we'll send up green sparks, right? Get your wands out and practice now. That's it. And if anyone gets in trouble, send up red sparks, and we'll all come and find you. So be careful. Let's go. The forest was black and silent. A little way into it, they reached a fork in the earth path, and Harry, Hermione, and Hagrid took the left path, while Malfoy, Neville, and Fang took the right. They walked in silence, their eyes on the ground. Every now and then, a ray of moonlight through the branches above lit a spot of silver-blue blood on the fallen leaves. Harry saw that Hagrid looked very worried. Could a werewolf be killing the unicorns? Harry asked. Not fast enough, said Hagrid. It's not easy to catch a unicorn. They're powerful magic creatures. I never knew one to be hunted before. I never knew one to be hurt before. They walked past a mossy tree stump. Harry could hear running water There must be a stream somewhere close by. There was still spots of unicorn blood here and there along the winding path. You all right, Hermione? Hagrid whispered. Don't worry. Cannot have gone far if it's this badly hurt, and then we'll be able to... Get behind that tree! Hagrid seized Harry and Hermione and hoisted them off the path and put them behind a towering oak. He pulled out an arrow and fitted it in his crossbow. Raising it, ready to fire, three of them listening. Something was slithering over dead leaves nearby. It sounded like a cloak trailing along the ground. Hagrid was squinting up the dark path, but after a few seconds, the sound faded away. I knew it, he murmured. There's something in here that shouldn't be. A werewolf? Harry suggested. That wasn't no werewolf, and it wasn't no unicorn neither, said Hagrid grimly. Right, follow me. Be careful now. They walked more slowly, ears straining for the faintest sound. Suddenly, in a clearing ahead, something definitely moved. Who's there? Hagrid called. Show yourself! I'm armed! And into the clearing came... Was it a man or a horse? To the waist, a man with red hair and beard. But below that was a horse's gleaming chestnut body with a long reddish tail. Harry and Hermione's jaws dropped. Oh, it's you, Ronan, said Hagrid in relief. How are you? He leaned forward and shook the centaur's hand. Good evening to you, Hagrid, said Ronan. He had a deep, sorrowful voice. Were you going to shoot me? Can't be too careful, Ronan, said Hagrid, patting his crossbow. There's something bad loose in this forest. This is Harry Potter and Hermione Granger, by the way, students up from the castle. And this is Ronan, you two. He's a centaur. We've noticed, said Hermione faintly. Good evening, said Ronan. Students, are you? And do you learn much up at the school? A bit, said Hermione timidly. A bit? Well, that's something, Ronan sighed. He flung back his head and stared at the sky. Mars is bright tonight. Yeah, said Hagrid, glancing up too. Listen, I'm glad we've ran into you, Ronan, 'cause there's a unicorn been hurt. You seen anything? Ronan didn't answer immediately. He stared unblinkingly upward and then sighed again. Always the innocent are the first victims, he said. So it has been for ages past. So it is now. Yeah, said Hagrid. But have you seen anything, Ronan? Anything unusual? Mars is bright tonight, Ronan repeated, while Hagrid watched him impatiently. Unusually bright. Yeah, but I was meaning anything unusual a bit nearer to home, said Hagrid. So you haven't noticed anything strange? Yet again, Ronan still took a while to answer. At last he said, The forest hides many secrets. A movement in the trees behind Ronan made Hagrid raise his bow again, but it was only a second centaur, black-haired and bodied, and wilder looking than Ronan. Hello, Bane, said Hagrid. All right? Good evening, Hagrid. I hope you are well. Well enough. Look, I just been asking Ronan, you seen anything odd in here lately? There's a unicorn, been injured. Would you know anything about it? Bane walked over to stand next to Ronan. He looked skyward. Mars is bright tonight, he said simply. We've heard, said Hagrid grumpily. Well, if either of you do see anything, let me know, won't you? We'll be off then. Harry and Hermione followed him out of the clearing, staring over their shoulders at Ronan and Bane until the trees blocked their view. Never, said Hagrid irritably, try to get a straight answer out of a centaur. Ruddy stargazers. Not interested in anything closer than the moon. Are there many of them in here? Asked Hermione. Oh, a fair few. Keep themselves to themselves, mostly. But they're good enough about turning up if ever I want a word. They're deep, mind centaurs. They know things, just don't let on much. Do you think that was a centaur we heard earlier? Said Harry. Did that sound like hooves to you? Nah, if you ask me, that's been what's killing the unicorns. Never heard anything like it before. They walked on through the dense, dark trees. Harry kept looking nervously over his shoulder. He had the nasty feeling that they were being watched. He was very glad they had Hagrid and his crossbow with him. They had just passed a bend in the path when Hermione grabbed Hagrid's arm. "Hagrid, look! Red sparks! The others are in trouble!" "All right, you two wait here," Hagrid shouted. "Stay on the path. I'll come back for you." They heard him crashing away through the undergrowth and stood looking at each other, very scared, until they couldn't hear anything but the rustling of leaves around them. "You don't think they've been hurt, do you?" whispered Hermione. "I don't care if Malfoy has, but if something's got Neville, it's our fault he's in here in the first place." The minutes dragged by. Their ears seemed sharper than usual. Harry seemed to be picking up every sigh of the wind, every cracking twig. What was going on? Where were the others? At last, a great crunching noise announced Hagrid's return. Malfoy, Neville, and Fang were with him. Hagrid was fuming. Malfoy, it seemed, had sneaked up behind Neville and grabbed him as a joke. Neville had panicked and sent up sparks. "You'll be lucky to catch anything now with the racket you two be making. Right, we're changing groups. Neville, you stay with me and Hermione. Harry, you go with Fang and this idiot." "Sorry," Hagrid whispered to Harry, "but I'll have a harder time frightening you, and we've got to get this done." So Harry set off into the heart of the forest with Malfoy and Fang. They walked for nearly half an hour, deeper and deeper into the forest, until the path became almost impossible to follow because the trees were so thick. Harry thought the blood seemed to be getting thicker. There were splashes on the roots of trees, and as though the poor creature had been thrashing around in panic. Close by, Harry could see a clearing ahead, through the tangled branches of an ancient oak. "Look," he murmured, holding out his arm to stop Malfoy. Something bright white was gleaming on the ground. They inched closer. It was the unicorn, all right, and it was dead. Harry had never seen anything so beautiful and sad. Its long, slender legs were stuck out at odd angles where it had fallen. Its mane was spread pearly white on the dark leaves. Harry had taken one step toward it when a slithering sound made him freeze where he stood. A bush on the edge of the clearing quivered. Sorry, guys. Then, out of the shadows, a hooded figure came crawling across the ground like some stalking beast. Harry, Malfoy, and Fang stood transfixed. The cloaked figure reached the unicorn, lowered its head over the wound on the animal's side, and began to drink its blood. "Ah!" Malfoy let out a terrible scream and bolted. That was a terrible scream. So did Fang. The hooded figure raised its head and looked right at Harry. Unicorn blood was dripping down its front. It got to its feet and came swiftly towards Harry. He couldn't move for fear. Then a pain like he'd never felt before pierced his head. It was as though his scar was on fire. Half blinded, he staggered backward. He heard hooves behind him, galloping, and something jumped clean over Harry, charging at the figure. The pain in Harry's head was so bad he fell to his knees. It took a minute or two to pass. When he looked up, the figure had gone. A centaur was standing over him. Not Ronan or Bane. This one looked younger. He had white blonde hair and a palomino body. Nice. "Are you all right?" said the centaur, pulling Harry to his feet. "Yes, thank you. What was that?" The centaur didn't answer. He had astonishingly blue eyes like pale sapphires. He looked carefully at Harry, his eyes lingering on a scar that stood out, livid, on Harry's forehead. "You're the Potter boy," he said. You had better get back to Hagrid. The forest is not safe at this time, especially for you. Can you ride? It'll be quicker this way. My name is Firenze, he added, as he lowered himself onto his front legs so that Harry could clamber onto his back. There was suddenly a sound of more galloping from the other side of the clearing. Ronan and Bane came bursting through the trees, their flanks heaving and sweating. "Firenze!" Bane thundered. "What are you doing? You have a human on your back. Have you no shame? Are you a common mule?" "Do you realize who this is?" said Firenze. "This is the Potter boy. The quicker he leaves the forest, the better." "What have you been telling him?" growled Bane. "Remember, Firenze, we are sworn not to set ourselves against the heavens. Have you not read what is to come in the moments of the planets?" Ronan pawed the ground nervously. "I'm sure Firenze thought he was acting for the best," he said in a gloomy voice. Bane kicked his back legs in anger. "For the best? What is that to do with us? Centaurs are concerned with what has been foretold. It is not our business to run around like donkeys after stray humans in the forest." Firenze suddenly reared onto his hind legs in anger, so that Harry had to grab his shoulders to stay on. "Do you not see that unicorn?" Firenze bellowed at Bane. "Do you not understand why it was killed? Or have the planets not let you in on that secret? I set myself against what is lurking in this forest, Bane. Yes, with humans alongside me if I must." When Firenze whisked around with Harry clutching on as best he could, they plunged off into the trees, leaving Ronan and Bane behind them. Harry had no clue what was going on. "Why is Bane so angry?" he asked. "What was that thing you saved me from anyway?" Firenze slowed to a walk, warned Harry to keep his head bowed in case of low-hanging branches, but did not answer Harry's question. They made their way through the trees in silence for so long that Harry thought Firenze didn't want to speak to him anymore. They were passing through a particularly dense patch of trees, however, when Firenze suddenly stopped. "Harry Potter, do you know what unicorn blood is used for?" "No," said Harry, startled by the odd question. "We've only used the horn and the tail in potions." "That is because it's a monstrous thing to slay a unicorn," said Firenze. "Only one who has nothing to lose and everything to gain would commit such a crime. The blood of a unicorn will keep you alive, even if you are an inch from death, but it has a terrible price. You have slain something pure and defenseless to save yourself, and you will have but a half-life, a cursed life, from the moment the blood touches your lips." Harry stared at the back of Firenze's head, which was dappled silver in the moonlight. "But who'd be that desperate?" he wondered aloud. "If you're going to be cursed forever, death's better, isn't it?" "It is," Firenze agreed, "unless you need it to stay alive long enough to drink something else. Something that will bring you back to full strength and power. Something that will mean you can never die. Mr. Potter, do you know what is hidden in the school at this very moment?" "The Sorcerer's Stone! Of course! The elixir of life! But I don't understand. Who? What? Can you think of nobody who has waited many years to return to power, who has clung to life, awaiting their chance?" It was as though an iron fist had clutched suddenly around Harry's heart. Over the rustling of the trees, he seemed to hear once more that Hagrid had told him the night we met. "Someone says he died. Codswallop, in my opinion. Dunno if he had enough human left in him to die." "Do you mean," Harry croaked, "that Harry! Harry, are you all right?" Hermione came running towards them down the path, Hagrid puffing along behind her. "I'm fine," said Harry, hardly knowing what to say. "The unicorn's dead, Hagrid. It's in the clearing back there." "This is where I leave you," Firenze murmured as Hagrid hurried off to examine the unicorn. "You are safe now." Harry slid off his back. "Good luck, Harry Potter," said Firenze. "The planets have been read wrongly before now, even by centaurs. I hope that this is one of those times." He turned and cantered back into the depths of the forest, leaving Harry shivering behind him. Ron had fallen asleep in the dark common room, waiting for them to return. He shouted something about Quidditch fouls when Harry roughly shook him awake. In a matter of seconds, though, he was wide-eyed as Harry began to tell him and Hermione what had happened in the forest. Harry couldn't sit down. He paced up and down in front of the fire. He was still shaking. Snape wants the stone for Voldemort, and Voldemort's waiting in the forest. All this time, we thought Snape just wanted to get rich. Stop saying that name, said Ron in a terrified whisper, as if he thought Voldemort could hear them. Harry wasn't listening. Firenze saved me, but he shouldn't have done so. Bane was furious. He was talking about interfering with what the planets say is going to happen. That they must show that Voldemort's coming back. Bane thinks Firenze should have let Voldemort kill me. I suppose that's written in the stars as well. Stop saying the name, Ron hissed. So all I've got to wait for now is Snape to steal the stone, Harry went on feverishly. Then Voldemort will be able to come and finish me off. Well, I suppose Bane'll be happy. Hermione looked very frightened, but she had a word of comfort. Harry, everyone says that Dumbledore's the only one you know who was ever afraid of. With Dumbledore around, you know who won't touch you. Anyway, who says the centaurs are right? It sounds like fortune-telling to me, and Professor McGonagall says that's a very imprecise branch of magic. The sky had turned light before they stopped talking. They went to bed exhausted, their throats sore. But the night's surprises weren't over. When Harry pulled back his sheets, he found his invisibility cloak neatly underneath. There was a note pinned to it. Just in case. What time is it? The next chapter's a really long one. There are only 2 chapters left of the entire book. Do we want to read them tomorrow night? Both those 2 chapters tomorrow night and end the book on Sunday? Or I can keep going tonight. I'm waiting for Angie to... You want me to finish the whole book tonight? That's 40 pages. Alright, let me grab my charger and plug in my charger. We will finish Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone tonight. And Monday we will start Harry Potter and... Yep, the last 2 chapters. The last 2 chapters. Protect the unicorns, guys. Protect the unicorns. One more? Angie, that 1 chapter is ridiculously long. Are you guys looking at your book right now? I know you have it. Oop, sorry. Yes, I know the unicorn died. Alright, if I'm reading this chapter through the trap door... Alright. Okay. All of the hearts. Alright, is everybody ready? I'm dropping myself. Look at that. In years to come, Harry would never quite remember how he had managed to get through his exams when he had... Sorry, guys. In years to come, Harry would never quite remember how he had managed to get through his exams when he half expected Voldemort to come bursting through the door at any moment. Yet the days crept by, and there could be no doubt that Fluffy was still alive and well behind the locked door. It was sweltering hot, especially in the large classroom where they did their written papers. They had been given special new quills for the exam, which had been bewitched by an anti-cheating spell. They had practice exams as well. Professor Flitwick called them one by one into his class to see if they could make a pineapple tap dance across a desk. Professor McGonagall watched them turn a mouse into a snuff box. Points were given for how pretty the snuff box was, but taken away if any had whiskers. Snape made them all nervous, breathing down their necks when they tried to remember how to make a forgetfulness potion. Harry did the best he could, trying to ignore the stabbing pains in his forehead, which had been bothering him ever since his trip into the forest. Neville thought Harry had a bad case of exam nerves because Harry couldn't sleep. But the truth was that Harry kept being woken by his old nightmare, except that it was now worse than ever because it was a hooded figure dripping blood on it. There was a hooded figure dripping blood in it. Perhaps it was because they hadn't seen what Harry had seen in the forest, or because they didn't have scars burning on their foreheads. But Ron and Hermione didn't seem as worried about the stone as Harry. The idea of Voldemort certainly scared them, but he didn't keep visiting them in dreams. They were so busy with their studying, they didn't have much time to fret about what Snape or what anyone else was up to. Their very last exam was History of Magic. 1 hour of answering questions about batty old wizards who invented self-stirring cauldrons, and they'd be free. Free for a whole wonderful week until their exam results came out. When the ghost of Professor Binns told them to put down their quills and roll up their parchment, Harry couldn't help cheering with the rest. "Huh, this was far easier than I thought it would be," said Hermione as they joined the crowds flocking out onto the sunny grounds. "I needn't have learned about the 1637 werewolf code of conduct or the uprising of Ulfric the Eager." Hermione always liked to go through their exam papers afterwards, but Ron said this made him feel ill, so they wandered down to the lake and flopped under a tree. The Weasley twins and Lee Jordan were tickling the tentacles of a giant squid, which was basking in the warm shadows. "No more studying," Ron said happily, stretched out on the grass. "You could look more cheerful, Harry. We've got a week before we find out how badly we've done. There's no need to worry about it yet." Harry was rubbing his forehead. "I wish I knew what this means," he burst out angrily. "My scar keeps hurting. It's happened before, but never as often as this." "Go to Madame Pomfrey," Hermione suggested. "I'm not ill," said Harry. "I think it's a warning. It means danger's coming." Ron couldn't get worked up. It was too hot. "Harry, relax. Hermione's right. The stone's safe as long as Dumbledore's around. Anyway, we've never had any proof Snape found out how to get past Fluffy. He nearly had his leg ripped off once. He's not going to try again in a hurry. And Neville will play Quidditch for England before Hagrid lets Dumbledore down." Harry nodded, but he couldn't shake off a lurking feeling that there was something he'd forgotten to do. Something important. When he tried to explain this, Hermione said, "That's just the exams. I woke up last night and was halfway through my transfiguration notes before I remembered we'd done that one." Harry was quite sure the unsettled feeling didn't have anything to do with work, though. He watched an owl flutter toward the school across the bright blue sky, a note crumpled in its mouth. Hagrid was the only one who ever sent him letters. Hagrid would never betray Dumbledore. Hagrid would never tell anyone how to get past Fluffy. Never. But Harry suddenly jumped to his feet. "Where are you going?" said Ron sleepily. "I've just thought of something," said Harry. He had turned white. "We have got to go and see Hagrid. Now." "Why?" panted Hermione, hurrying to keep up. "Don't you think it's a bit odd," said Harry, scapering up the grassy slope, that what Hagrid wants more than anything else is a dragon, and a stranger turns up who just happens to have a dragon egg in his pocket? How many people wander around with dragon eggs? It's against wizard law. Lucky they found Hagrid, don't you think? Why didn't I see it before? What are you talking about? Said Ron, but Harry, sprinting across the grass towards the forest, didn't answer. Hagrid was sitting in an armchair outside his house. His trousers and sleeves were rolled up, and he was shelling peas into a large bowl. Hello, he said, smiling. Finished your exams? Got time for a drink? Yes, please, said Ron, but Harry cut him off. No, we're in a hurry, Hagrid. We've got to ask you something. You know that night you won Norbert? What did the stranger you were playing cards with look like? Dunno, said Hagrid casually. He wouldn't take his cloak off. He saw the three of them look stunned and raised his eyebrows. It's not that unusual. You get a lot of funny folk in the Hoghead. That's the pub down in the village. Must have been a dragon dealer, mightn't he? I never saw his face. He kept his hood up. Harry sank down next to the bowl of peas. What did you talk to him about, Hagrid? Did he mention Hogwarts at all? Might have come up, said Hagrid, frowning as he tried to remember. Yeah, he asked what I did, and I told him I was gamekeeper here. He asked a bit about the sort of creatures I look after, and told him, and I said I always really wanted a dragon, and then, I can't remember too well, because he kept buying me drinks. Let's see. Yeah, he said he had a dragon egg, and we could play cards for it if I wanted. But he had to be sure I could handle it, so he didn't want it to go to any old home, so I told him after a Fluffy, a dragon would be easy. And did he seem interested in Fluffy? Harry asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Oh, yeah. How many three-headed dogs do you meet, even around Hogwarts? So, as I told him, Fluffy's a piece of cake if you know how to calm him down. Just play him a bit of music and he'll go straight off to sleep. Hagrid suddenly looked horrified. I shouldn't have told you that, he blurted out. Oh, forget I said it. Hey, where are you going? Harry, Ron, and Hermione didn't speak to each other at all until they came to a halt in the entrance hall, which seemed very cold and gloomy after the grounds. We've got to go to Dumbledore, said Harry. Hagrid told that stranger how to get past Fluffy, and it was either Snape or Voldemort under that cloak. It must have been easy once he'd got Hagrid drunk. I just hope Dumbledore believes us. Firenze might back us up if Bane doesn't stop him. Where's Dumbledore's office? I looked around as if hoping to see a sign pointing them in the right direction. They had never been told where Dumbledore lived, nor did they know anyone who'd been sent to see him. We'll just have to, Harry began, and his voice suddenly rang across the hall. What are you three doing inside? It was Professor McGonagall carrying a large pile of books. We want to see Professor Dumbledore, said Hermione, rather bravely, Harry and Ron thought. See Professor Dumbledore, Professor McGonagall repeated, as if this was a very fishy thing to want to do. Why? Harry swallowed. Now what? It's sort of secret, he said, but he wished at once he hadn't, because Professor McGonagall's nostrils flared. Ugh. Tacos. Professor Dumbledore left 10 minutes ago, she said coldly. He received an urgent owl from the Ministry of Magic and flew off for London at once. He's gone, said Harry frantically. Now? Professor Dumbledore is a very great wizard, Potter. He has many demands on his time. But this is important. Something you have to say is more important than the Ministry of Magic, Potter? Look, said Harry, throwing caution to the wind. Professor, it's about the Sorcerer's Stone. Whatever Professor McGonagall had expected, it wasn't that. The books she was carrying tumbled out of her arms, but she didn't pick them up. How do you know, she sputtered. Professor, I think I know that someone's going to try and steal the stone. I've got to talk to Professor Dumbledore. She eyed him with a mixture of shock and suspicion. Professor Dumbledore will be back tomorrow, she said finally. I don't know how you found out about the stone, but rest assured, no one can possibly steal it. It's too well protected. But Professor Potter, I know what I'm talking about, she said shortly. She bent down and gathered up the fallen books. I suggest you all go back outside and enjoy the sunshine. But they didn't. It's tonight, said Harry, once they were sure Professor McGonagall was out of earshot. Snape's going through that trapdoor tonight. He's found out everything he needs, and now he's got Dumbledore out of the way. He sent that note. I bet the Ministry will get a real shock when Dumbledore turns up. But what can we... Hermione gasped. Harry and Ron wheeled around. Snape was standing there. Good afternoon, he said smoothly. They stared at him. You shouldn't be inside on a day like this, he said with an odd, twisted smile. We were... Harry began, without any idea of what he was going to say. You want to be more careful, said Snape. Hanging around like this, people will think you're up to something. And Gryffindor really can't afford to lose any more points, can it? Harry flushed. They turned to go outside, but Snape called after them. Be warned, Potter. Any more nighttime wanderings, and I will personally make sure you are expelled. Good day to you. He strode off in the direction of the staff room. Out on the stone steps, Harry turned to the others. Right, here's what we got to do, he whispered urgently. One of us has got to keep an eye on Snape. Wait outside the staff room and follow him if he leaves it. Hermione, you'd better do that. Why me? It's obvious, said Ron. You can pretend to be waiting for Professor Flitwick. You know, he put on a high voice. Oh, Professor Flitwick, I'm so worried. I think I've got question 14B wrong. Oh, shut up, said Hermione. But she agreed to go and watch out for Snape. And we'd better go outside the third-floor corridor, said Harry told Ron. Come on. But that part of the plan didn't work. No sooner had they reached the doors separating Fluffy from the rest of the school than Professor McGonagall turned up again, and this time she lost her temper. I suppose you think you're harder to get past than a pack of enchantments, she stormed. Enough of this nonsense. If I hear you've come anywhere near here again, I'll take another 50 points from Gryffindor. Yes, Weasley, from my own house. Harry and Ron went back to the common room. Harry had just said, at least Hermione's on Snape's tail, when the portrait of the fat lady swung open, and Hermione came in. Jesus. I'm so sorry, Harry, she wailed. Snape came out and asked me what I was doing, so I said I was waiting for Flitwick, and Snape went to get him, and I only just got away. I don't know where Snape went. Well, that's it then, isn't it? Harry said. And the other two stared at him. He was pale, and his eyes were glittering. I'm going out of here tonight. I'm going to try and get to the stone first. You're mad, said Ron. You can't, said Hermione. After what Professor McGonagall and Snape have said, you'll be expelled. So what? Harry shouted. Don't you understand? If Snape gets hold of the stone, Voldemort's coming back. Haven't you heard what it was like when he was trying to take over? There won't be any Hogwarts to be expelled from. He'll flatten it, or turn it into a school for the dark arts. Losing points doesn't matter anymore, can't you see? Do you think he'll leave you and your families alone if Gryffindor wins the House Cup? If I get caught before I can get the stone, well, I'll have to go back to the Dursleys and wait for Voldemort to find me there. It's only dying a bit later than I would have, because I'm never going over to the dark side. I'm going through that trapdoor tonight, and nothing you two say is going to stop me. Voldemort killed my parents. Remember? He glared at them. You're right, Harry, said Hermione in a small voice. I'll use the invisibility cloak, said Harry. It's just lucky I got it back. But will it cover all three of us, said Ron. All three of us? Oh, come off it. You don't think we'd let you go alone? Of course not, said Hermione briskly. How do you think you'll get to the stone without us? I'd better go and look through my books. There might be something useful. But if we get caught, you two will be expelled too. Not if I can help it, said Hermione grimly. Flitwick told me in secret that I got 112% on his exam. They're not throwing me out after that. After dinner, the three of them sat nervously apart in the common room. Nobody bothered them. None of the Gryffindors had anything to say to Harry anymore, after all. This was the first night he hadn't been upset by it. Hermione was skimming through all of her notes, hoping to come across one of the enchantments they were about to try to break. Harry and Ron didn't talk much. Both of them were thinking about what they were about to do. Slowly, the room emptied as people drifted off to bed. "Better get the cloak," Ron muttered, as Lee Jordan finally left, stretching and yawning. "Do it." Harry ran upstairs to their dark dormitory. He pulled out the cloak, and his eyes fluttered on the... His eyes fell on the flute Hagrid had given him for Christmas. He pocketed it to use on Fluffy. He didn't feel much like singing. He ran back down to the common room. "All right, we better put the cloak on here and make sure it covers all of us. If Filch spots one of our feet wandering along on its own..." "What are you doing?" said a voice from the corner of the room. Neville appeared from behind an armchair, clutching Trevor the Toad, who looked as though he'd been making another bid for freedom. "Nothing, Neville, nothing," said Harry hurriedly, putting the cloak behind his back. Neville stared at their guilty faces. "You're going out again," he said. No, said Hermione. "No, we're not. Why don't you go to bed, Neville?" Harry looked at the grandfather clock by the door. They couldn't afford to waste any more time. Snape might even now be playing Fluffy to sleep. "You can't go out," said Neville. "You'll be caught again. Gryffindor will be in even more trouble." "You don't understand," said Harry. "This is important." But Neville was clearly steeling himself to do something desperate. "I won't let you do it," he said, hurrying to stand in front of the portrait hole. I'll fight you." "Neville," Ron exploded, "get away from that hole, and don't be an idiot." "Don't call me an idiot," said Neville. "I don't think you should be breaking any more rules. And you are the one who told me to stand up to people." "Yes, but not to us," said Ron in exasperation. "Neville, you don't know what you're doing." He took a step forward, and Neville dropped Trevor the Toad, who leapt out of sight. "Go on, then. Try and hit me," said Neville, raising his fists. "I'm ready." Harry turned to Hermione. "Do something," he said desperately. Hermione stepped forward. "Neville," she said, "I'm really, really sorry about this." And she raised her wand. "Petrificus Totalis," she cried, pointing it at Neville. Neville's arms snapped to his sides. His legs sprung together. His whole body rigid, he swayed where he stood, and then fell flat on his face, stiff as a board. Hermione ran to turn him over. Neville's jaws were jammed together so he couldn't speak. Only his eyes were moving, looking at them in horror. "What have you done to him?" Harry whispered. "It's the full body bind," said Hermione miserably. "Oh, Neville, I'm so sorry." "We had to, Neville. No time to explain," said Harry. "You'll understand later, Neville," said Ron as they stepped over him and pulled on the invisibility cloak. But leaving Neville laying motionless on the floor didn't feel like a very good omen. In their nervous state, every statue's shadow looked like Filch. Every distant breath of wind sounded like Peeves swooping down on them. At the foot of the first set of stairs, they spotted Miss Norris skulking near the top. "Oh, let's kick her, just this once," Ron whispered in Harry's ear, but Harry shook his head. As they climbed carefully around her, Mrs. Norris turned her lamp-like eyes on them, but didn't do anything. They didn't meet anyone else until they reached the staircase up to the 3rd floor. Peeves was bobbing halfway up, loosening the carpet so that people would trip. "Who's there?" he said suddenly as they climbed toward him. He narrowed his wicked black eyes. "Know you're there, even if I can't see you. Are you ghouly or ghosty or wee student beastie?" He rose up in the air and floated there, squinting at them. "Should call Filch, I should, if something's a-creeping around unseen." Harry had a sudden idea. "Peeves," he said in a hoarse whisper. "The Bloody Baron has his own reasons for being invisible." Peeves almost fell out of the air in shock. He caught himself in time and hovered about a foot off the stairs. "Sorry, your bloodiness, Mr. Baron, sir," he said greasily. My mistake. I didn't see you. Of course I didn't. You're invisible. Forgive old Peevesy his little joke, sir." I have business here, Peeves, croaked Harry. Stay away from this place tonight. I will, sir. I most certainly will, said Peeves, rising up in the air again. Hope your business goes well, Baron. I'll not bother you. And he scooted off. Brilliant, Harry, whispered Ron. A few seconds later, they were there, outside the third-floor corridor, and the door was already ajar. Well, there you are, Harry said quietly. Snape's already got past Fluffy. Seeing the open door somehow seemed to impress upon all three of them what was facing them. Underneath the cloak, Harry turned to the other two. If you want to go back, I won't blame you, he said. You can take the cloak. I won't need it now. Don't be stupid, said Ron. We're coming, said Hermione. Harry pushed the door open. As the door creaked, low, rumbling growls met their ears. All three of the dogs' noses sniffed madly in their direction, even though it couldn't see them. What's that at its feet? Hermione whispered. Looks like a harp, said Ron. Snape must have left it there. It must wake up the moment you stop playing, said Harry. Well, here goes. He put Hagrid's flute to his lips and blew. It wasn't really a tune, but from the first note the beast's eyes began to drop. Harry hardly drew breath. Slowly the dog's growls ceased. It tottered on its paws and fell to its knees. Then it slumped to the ground, fast asleep. Keep playing, Ron warned Harry as they slipped out of the cloak and crept towards the trapdoor. They could feel the dog's hot, smelly breath as they approached the giant heads. I think we'll be able to pull the door open, said Ron, peering over the dog's back. Want to go first, Hermione? No, I don't. All right. Ron gritted his teeth and carefully stepped over the dog's legs. He bent and pulled the ring of the trapdoor, which swung up and open. What can you see? Hermione said anxiously. Nothing. Just black. There's no way of climbing down. We'll just have to drop. Harry, who was still playing the flute, waved at Ron to get his attention and pointed at himself. You want to go first? Are you sure? Said Ron. I don't know how deep this thing goes. Give the flute to Hermione so she can keep him asleep. Harry handed the flute over. In a few seconds' silence, the dog growled and twitched. But the moment Hermione began to play, it fell back into a deep sleep. Harry climbed over it and looked down through the trapdoor. There was no sign of the bottom. He lowered himself through the hole until he was hanging on by his fingertips. Then he looked up at Ron and said, If anything happens to me, don't follow. Go straight to the Owlery and send Hedwig to Dumbledore. Right? Right, said Ron. See you in a minute, I hope. And Harry let go. Cold, damp air rushed past him as he fell down, 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 and flump. With a funny, muffled sort of thump, he landed on something soft. He sat up and felt around. His eyes were not used to the gloom, but it felt as though he was sitting on some sort of plant. It's okay, he called up to the light the size of a postage stamp, which was the open trapdoor. It's a soft landing. You can jump. Ron followed right away. He landed sprawled next to Harry. What's this stuff? Were his first words. Dunno, some sort of plant thing. I suppose it's here to break the fall. Come on, Hermione. The distant music stopped. There was a loud bark from the dog, but Hermione had already jumped. She landed on Harry's other side. Perfect landing, right? We must be miles under the school, she said. Luckily, this plant thing's here, really, said Ron. Lucky, shrieked Hermione. Look at you both. What, Zach?
Nothing.
She leapt up and staggered towards the damp wall. She had to stagger because the moment she had landed, the plant had started to twist like snake-like tendrils around her ankles. As for Harry and Ron, their legs had already been bound tightly in long creepers without their noticing. Hermione had managed to free herself before the plant got its firm grip on her. Now she watched in horror as the two boys fought to pull the plant off them. But the more they strained against it, the tighter and faster the plant wound around them. Stop moving, Hermione ordered them. I know what this is. It's Devil's Snare. Oh, I'm so glad you know what it's called. That's a great help, snarled Ron, leaning back, trying to stop the plant from curling around his neck. Stop moving! I'm trying to remember how to kill it, said Hermione. Oh, hurry up! I can't breathe, Harry gasped, wrestling with it as it curled around its chest. Devil's snare! Devil's snare! What did Professor Sprout say? It likes the dark and the damp. So light a fire! Harry choked. Ah, yes, of course, but there's no wood, Hermione cried, waving her hands. Have you gone mad? Ron bellowed. Are you a witch or not? Oh, right, said Hermione, as she whipped out her wand, waved it, muttered something, and set a jet of the same bluebell flame she'd used on Snape at the plant. In a matter of seconds, the two boys felt it loosening its grip as it cringed away from the light and warmth. Wriggling and flailing, it unraveled itself from their bodies, and they were able to pull free. Huh, lucky you pay attention in herbology, Hermione, said Harry, as he joined her by the wall, wiping sweat off his face. Yeah, said Ron, and lucky Harry didn't lose his head in a crisis. There's no wood. Honestly. This way, said Harry, pointing down a stone passageway, which was the only way forward. All they could hear, apart from their footsteps, was the gentle drip of water trickling down the walls. The passageway sloped downward, and Harry was reminded of Gringotts. With an unpleasant jolt of heart, he remembered the dragon said to be guarding vaults in the Wizard's Bank. If they met a dragon, a full-grown dragon, Norbert had been bad enough. Can you hear something? Ron whispered. Harry listened. A soft rustling and clinking seemed to be coming from up ahead. Do you think it's ghosts? I don't know. Sounds like wings to me. There's light ahead. I can see something moving. They reached the edge of the passageway. Reached the edge of the passageway and saw before them a brilliantly lit chamber, its ceiling arching high above them. It was full of small, jewel-bright birds fluttering and tumbling all around the room. On the opposite side of the chamber was a heavy wooden door. Do you think they'll attack us if we cross the room? Said Ron. Probably, said Harry. They don't look very vicious. But I suppose if they all swoop down at once, well, there's no other choice. I'll run. He took a deep breath, covered his face with his arms, and sprinted across the room. He expected to feel sharp beaks or claws tearing at him any second, but nothing happened. He reached the door untouched. He pulled the handle, but it was locked. The other two followed him. They tugged and heaved on the door, but it wouldn't budge. Not even when Hermione tried her Alohomora charm. Now what? Said Ron. These birds, they can't just be here for decoration, said Hermione. They watched the birds soaring overhead, glittering. They're not birds, said Harry suddenly. They're keys. Winged keys. Look carefully. So that must mean... He looked around the chamber while the other two squinted up at the flock of keys. Ah, yes, look! Broomsticks! We've got to catch the key to the door. I need water. My mouth is dry. But there are hundreds of them. Ron examined the lock on the door. We're looking for a big, old-fashioned one, probably silver, like the handle. They each seized a broomstick and kicked off into the air, soaring into the midst of clouds of keys. They grabbed and snatched, but the bewitched keys darted and dived so quickly it was almost impossible to catch one. Not for nothing, though, Harry, the youngest seeker in a century, Harry was. He had a knack for spotting things other people didn't. After a minute's weaving about through the whirls of rainbow feathers, he noticed a large silver key that had a bent wing, as if it had already been caught and stuffed roughly into the keyhole. That one, he said to the others. That big one, there. No, there, with the bright blue wings. The feathers are all crumpled on one side. Ron was speeding in the direction that Harry was pointing, crashed into the ceiling, and nearly fell off his broom. "We've got to close in on it," Harry called, not taking his eyes off the key with the damaged wing. "Ron, you come at it from above. Hermione, stay below. Stop it from going down. I'll try and catch it. Right? Now!" Ron dived. Hermione rocketed upward. The key dodged them both. Harry streaked after it. It sped towards the wall. Harry leaned forward and with a nasty crunching noise pinned it against the stone with one hand. Ron and Hermione's cheers echoed around the chamber. They landed quickly, and Harry ran to the door, the key struggling in his hand. He rammed it into the lock and turned. It worked. The moment the lock had clicked open, the key took flight again, looking very battered now that it had been caught twice. "Ready?" Harry asked the other two, his hand on the door handle. They nodded. He pulled the door open. The next chamber was so dark they couldn't see anything at all. But as they stepped into it, light suddenly flooded the room to reveal an astonishing sight. They were standing on the edge of a huge chessboard. Behind the black chessmen, which were all taller than they were, and carved from what looked like black stone. Facing them, way across the chamber, were the white pieces. Harry, Ron, and Hermione shivered slightly. The towering white chessmen had no faces. "Now what do we do?" Harry whispered. "It's obvious, isn't it?" said Ron. "We've got to play our way across the room." Behind the white pieces, they could see another door. "How?" said Hermione nervously. "I think," said Ron, "we're going to have to be chessmen." He walked up to a black knight and put his hand out to touch the knight's horse. At once the stone sprung to life. The horse pawed the ground, and the knight turned its helmeted head to look down at Ron. "Do we, have to join you to get across?" The black knight nodded. Ron turned to the other two. "This needs thinking about," he said. "I suppose we've got to take the place of 3 of the black pieces." Harry and Hermione stayed quiet, watching Ron think. Finally he said, "Now, don't be offended or anything, but neither of you are that good at chess." "We're not offended," said Harry quickly. "Just tell us what to do." "Well, Harry, you take the place of that bishop, and Hermione, you go next to him instead of that castle. What about you?" "I'm going to be a knight," said Ron. The chessmen seemed to have been listening, because at these words, a knight, a bishop, and a castle turned their backs on the white pieces and walked off the board, leaving 3 empty squares that Ron, Hermione, and Harry took. "White always plays first in chess," said Ron, peering across the board. "Ah, yes, look." A white pawn had moved forward 2 squares. Ron started to direct the black pieces. They moved silently wherever he sent them. Harry's knees were trembling. What if they lost? "Harry, move diagonally 4 squares to the right." Their first real shock came when their other knight was taken. The white queen smashed him to the ground and dragged him off the board, where he lay still and face down. "Had to let that happen," said Ron, looking shaken. "Leaves you free to take that bishop, Hermione. Go on." Every time one of their men was lost, the white pieces showed no mercy. Soon there was a huddle of limp black players slumped against the wall. Twice, Ron only just noticed in time that Harry and Hermione were in danger. He himself darted around the board, taking almost as many white pieces as they had black ones. "We're nearly there," he muttered suddenly. Let me think. The white queen turned her blank face towards him. "Yes," said Ron softly. "It's the only way. I've got to be taken." "No!" Harry and Hermione shouted. "That's chess," snapped Ron. "We've got to make sacrifices. I take 1 step forward, and she'll take me. That leaves you free to checkmate the king, Harry. But no. Do you want to stop Snape or not?" "Ron! Look, if you don't hurry up, he'll already have the stone." There was no alternative. "Ready?" Ron called, his face pale but determined. "Here I go. Now don't hang around once we've won." He stepped forward, and the White Queen pounced. She struck Ron hard across the head with her stone arm, and he crashed to the floor. Hermione screamed but stayed on her square. The White Queen dragged Ron to one side. He looked as if he'd been knocked out. Shaking, Harry moved 3 spaces to the left. The White King took off his crown and threw it at Harry's feet. They had won. The chessmen parted and bowed, leaving the door ahead clear. With one desperate look back at Ron, Harry and Hermione charged through the door and up the next passageway. What if he's... No, he'll be all right, said Harry, trying to convince himself. All right, what do you reckon's next? Well, we had Sprouts. That was the Devil's Snare. Flitwick must have put charms on the keys. McGonagall transfigured the chessmen to make them alive. That leaves Quirrell's spell. And Snape's. They had reached another door. All right, Harry whispered. Go on. Harry pulled it open. A disgusting smell filled their nostrils, making both of them pull the robes up over their noses. Eyes watering, they saw flat on the floor in front of them a troll even larger than the one they had tackled, out cold with a bloody lump on its head. I'm glad we didn't have to fight that one, Harry whispered as they stepped carefully over one of its massive legs. Come on, I can't breathe. He pulled open the next door, both of them hardly daring to look at what came next. There was nothing very frightening in here, just a table with 7 differently shaped bottles standing out in a line. Snape's, said Harry. What do we have to do? They stepped over the threshold, and immediately a fire sprung up behind them in the doorway. It wasn't ordinary fire, either. It was purple. At the same instant, black flames shot up in the doorway, leading onward. They were trapped. Look! Hermione seized a roll of paper laying next to the bottles. Harry looked over her shoulder and read. Danger lies before you, while safety lies behind. 2 of us will help you, whichever you would find. 1 among us 7 will let you move ahead. Another will transport the drinker back instead. 2 among our number hold only nettle wine. 3 of us are killers, waiting hidden in line. Choose, unless you wish to stay here forevermore. To help you in your choice, we have given you these 4. First, however slyly the poison tries to hide, you will always find some on nettle wine's left side. Second, different are those who stand at either end, but if you would move onward, neither is your friend. Third, as you see clearly, are all different size. Neither dwarf nor giant holds death in their insides. Fourth, the second left and the second on the right are twins once you taste them, though different at first sight. Hermione let out a great sigh, and Harry, amazed, saw that she was smiling. The last thing he felt like doing. Brilliant, said Hermione. This isn't magic, it's logic. A puzzle. A lot of great wizards haven't got an ounce of logic. They'd be stuck in here forever. But so will we, won't we? Of course not, said Hermione. Everything we need is here on this paper. 7 bottles. 3 are poison, 2 are wine. 1 will get us safely through the... I don't know who that was, but someone was calling me. From Effingham. One will get us safely through Blackfire, and 1 will get us back through the purple. But how do we know which to drink? Give me a minute. Hermione read the paper several times. Then she walked up and down the line of bottles, muttering to herself and pointing at them. At last, she clasped her hands. Got it, she said. The smallest bottle will get us through the black fire towards the stone. Harry looked at the tiny bottle. There's only enough for 1 of us. That's hardly 1 swallow. They looked at one another. Which one will get you back through the purple flames? Hermione pointed at a round bottle on the right end of the line. You drink that, said Harry. No, listen. Go back and get Ron. Grab brooms from the Flying Key room. They'll get you out of the trapdoor and past Fluffy. Go straight to the Owlery and send Hedwig to Dumbledore. We need him. I might be able to hold Snape off for a while, but I'm no match for him, really. But Harry, what if you know who's with him? Well, I was lucky once, wasn't I? Said Harry, pointing at his scar. I might get lucky again. Hermione's lip trembled, and she suddenly dashed at Harry and threw her arms around him. Hermione! Harry, you're a great wizard, you know. Not as good as you, said Harry, very embarrassed as she let go of him. Me, said Hermione. Books and cleverness, there are more important things. Friendship and bravery and... Oh, Harry, just be careful. You drink first, said Harry. You are sure which is which, aren't you? Positive, said Hermione. She took a long drink from the round bottle at the end and shuddered. It's not poison, said Harry anxiously. No, but it's like ice. Quick, go, before it wears off. Good luck. Take care. Go. Hermione turned and walked straight through the purple fire. Harry took a deep breath and picked up the smallest bottle. He turned to face the black flames. Here I come, he said, and he drained the little bottle in one gulp. It was indeed as though ice was flooding his body. He put the bottle down and walked forward. He braced himself, saw the black flames licking his body, but couldn't feel them. For a moment he could see nothing but dark fire, and then he was on the other side, in the last chamber. But there was already someone there. But it wasn't Snape. It wasn't even Voldemort. And that is where we end tonight, guys. We will read the next chapter tomorrow. Bye! I gotta go check voicemails now.